Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Donald Trump cut ties with Benjamin Netanyahu after he blamed him of trying to play him around and manipulating him. And according to multiple reports, Donald Trump doesn't like to be portrayed as a man who is easily manipulated. We're going to go through all of the reports that are coming from Israel and globally today in relation to the Trump approach with Benjamin Netanyahu now that I spoke about before, but we'll go into more details now with more updated reports. And where are things going with the relations of the United States and Israel, especially with statements like Israel will be left alone if it's not included in a deal. The United States president is coming to the region to have certain deals with many countries. And the Americans are telling the Israelis, if you're not going to be included, you're going to be left alone. How far will things go? Are things going to deteriorate even further? Let's begin with this report here. Trump sidelines Netanyahu in Middle East policy as relations deteriorate. This is a report that was there from several days back. Trump is coming to the region and he is coming to visit the Saudi government officials and Saudi leaders, other countries too. He's going to talk to them about deals, about issues to do with the region, finances, security, economy. The Saudis previously told Donald Trump, don't talk to us about Israel and don't talk to us about normalizing with Israel once you come over. As a matter of fact, they put that as a prerequisite to Donald Trump and his administration in return for them agreeing to meet Donald Trump. Now, the bombshell landed today from Israel, and it was reported globally too. Trump cuts ties with Netanyahu over manipulation concerns report. And this is based on an Israeli army radio official statement. Yanir Kozin, a correspondent for the Israeli army radio, said in a post on his X account that Trump made the decision after close associates told Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer that the president believes that Netanyahu is manipulating him. An Israeli official added that Dermer's tone during recent discussions with senior Republican figures about what Trump should do was seen as arrogant and unhelpful. The official said that people around Trump told him that Netanyahu was manipulating him. There's nothing Trump hates more than being portrayed as a fool or someone being played. That's why he decided to cut contact with Netanyahu, the official added. Kozin pointed to the Israeli government's failure to present a concrete plan and timeline regarding Iran and Yemen's Houthis as a source of the worsening US-Israeli relations. The army radio correspondent also highlighted the Netanyahu government has failed to offer a concrete proposal to Gaza. So we're clearly seeing a cut in the communication between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Other reports that came from Israel said that Netanyahu has been calling Donald Trump and Donald Trump is not listening to Benjamin Netanyahu. He's not answering any of his calls. He's totally blanking him, and he's blanking him from the visit that's coming to the Middle East, the Middle East visit that Donald Trump is going to have very soon. This is coming amidst more reports in Israel about fear in Israel, growing concerns in Israel about these moves coming from Donald Trump, especially this report here in Ynet saying the surprise, frustration, and fear in Israel about Trump's zigzag policy and what lies behind it. Now, the Israeli government, the Israeli regime, they now have seen that Donald Trump can make certain moves and statements and then make different statements and moves, do the opposite. As a matter of fact, they felt that with the pressure that was applied on them to get into a deal, to get into a ceasefire deal, after Steve Witkoff met with Benjamin Netanyahu and started to give many interesting statements in that meeting, especially with reports in Israel saying that they were harsh statements there. And now Witkoff is having more interesting statements. In Israel, they're concerned about things related to their security, first and foremost. For example, Donald Trump stopping his attacks with the Houthis, having a direct deal with the Houthis, Ansarullah, going to have a deal with Iran. Previous reports that they were looking to have a deal with Hamas directly without Israel to These things are very serious. Israel also views it very seriously when the United States talks about Saudi Arabia having enriching uranium as well, having a nuclear project for civilian purposes, of course, not military purposes as declared, but they view that as something dangerous to them after Iran has already such an advanced nuclear program anyway, and the United States heading towards an agreement with Iran that wouldn't even look at Israel. As in, the matter is not being discussed. The United States, when they're talking with Iran, they're not talking about Yemen, they're not talking about Lebanon, they're not talking about anything. They're talking about Iran. Iran told them, you want to talk to us? We're talking about the nuclear project. All of the other things that you tie us to, that's something else. If you want to talk to us, talk about the nuclear project. That's why the United States went and did a deal with Yemen directly, because Iran told them, firstly, they're a separate thing, and you go and have a deal with them. And that's evidence to the fact that Iran is directly just having talks about its nuclear program. The United States, at the request of Israel in many cases, tries to tie security assurances or certain moves to be done in the region so that Iran can de-escalate or tell some of the movements that it supports, okay, stop attacking, whatever. But that clearly isn't the case. And that also shows you that these movements and these other countries, they have very high level of independence. Now, talking about Yemen, Trump, he made a statement a couple of days ago about the Ansarullah and the deal that he had with Yemen. And now he's having a new statement. And this is very interesting, actually. Donald Trump is starting to have a really interesting statement, especially in relation to Ansarullah in Yemen. And here's what he had to say.
But so we take their word for it. It was, we hit them very hard. They had a great capacity to withstand punishment. They took tremendous punishment. And, you could say there's a lot of bravery there. That it was amazing what they took. But we honor their commitment and their word. They gave us their word that they wouldn't be shooting ships anymore, and we honor that. But so we take their word for it. It was, we hit them very hard.
Bravery, honor their word, respect, all of that against a group. Why is he saying that? Well, he wouldn't have said that if Ansarullah weren't strong and weren't capable and did not force their position in the region. If the United States and the Genocide Coalition defeated them, they wouldn't have had to resort to talks. But as a matter of fact, the United States was talking to them from a very long time ago because they already knew their capabilities from the previous escalation days that they had in the region, and with their showcasing of their range of missiles that they have and how accurate they can target specific locations. So they eventually reached a deal. That deal excluded Israel, and now Donald Trump are calling them brave. All right. Can we see a pattern? Of course we can see a pattern. Donald Trump is not going to visit Israel. Donald Trump cut ties with Benjamin Netanyahu. Now they're reporting it from Israel. The Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, is trying to fix the problem. It isn't working. But is it a problem just with Donald Trump? Is it only Trump having an issue with Benjamin Netanyahu, or is there a US-Israel problem? There is a US-Israel problem, and I'll tell you why. Well, number one, it isn't just Donald Trump canceling or not visiting Israel. It's actually the US Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who is considered a man to be close to Israel. He had a scheduled visit to Israel, and he canceled. These are confirmed sources to the Jerusalem Post. This was reported in other locations too, other media outlets as well. Donald Trump, and there's a difference. Donald Trump, he didn't actually have a planned trip to Israel. Pete Hegseth did. So in a way, this is actually worse. Why? Because before, when Biden used to have problems with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Secretary of Defense and the people who are dealing with security and everything, they still used to go to Israel. And they were coordinating with the Israeli defense minister at the time, Yoav Gallant, who still had good contact with the Americans. These people who weren't really allied with Benjamin Netanyahu, they diffused the tensions before, but now the problem is Netanyahu has everyone fully aligned with him, and it's making it even more tense with the United States administration. Now, they're not giving any reasons, but it's obvious as daylight that the reasons are the tensions that are happening between Netanyahu and Trump and Israel as a whole and the United States. Donald Trump is not coming, criticizing Netanyahu, trying to manipulate him. They sacked Waltz, who they claimed that he was playing ball with Benjamin Netanyahu in any attempt or entertaining the idea to go and attack Iran. But now Hegseth is canceling a visit to Israel, most likely as part of a growing thing that's happening between the United States and Israel. Now, they did not elaborate in this report. They didn't say he canceled because he has something, or he canceled because, I don't know, he was ill. No. They are canceling visits, and they are clearly and publicly showing dissatisfaction from the Israeli side. Now, how is that being represented when it comes to the deal with Gaza? And is the deal with Gaza part of this problem? The deal with Gaza is the biggest part of these tensions, because Benjamin Netanyahu, he does not want to reach a deal with Hamas. And we had this report here in the Times of Israel saying that US is heavily pressuring Israel to reach a deal with Hamas. Witkoff asked for his criticism of Jerusalem to be leaked. Now, in this report, they're saying that Steve Witkoff, he's confirming that there's pressure on Israel to reach a deal when Trump arrives. Now, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to threaten Hamas with this deadline, either reach an agreement or we will go to Gideon's chariots, right? But clearly the Americans and the Israelis don't see eye to eye with this agreement. Clearly the United States already is fine with an agreement that Israel isn't fine with. Clearly it's only Israel that's the obstacle. Even the United States doesn't have a problem neither with the previous agreement that happened between Israel and Hamas, even before that, nor do they have a problem with the current proposed ceasefire agreement. They did not see any problem with that, but it's only Benjamin Netanyahu. Now they're applying pressure. Clearly Benjamin Netanyahu is not listening. He's not submitting to that pressure. But the interesting part is Steve Witkoff, the same man who applied pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to get into a deal before, he made an interesting statement, and he asked for his remarks to be published so that people can see that there is friction between the two. He said, and he met with the families of the Israeli prisoners who are held in Gaza. He said, if until today the hostages paid the price for not ending the war, then today the price will be much higher for Israel. The price will be much heavier for Israel, and not only for the hostages. And then sources are saying Israel needs to take advantage of the emerging US nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia, which Trump is reportedly no longer conditioning on Riyadh to normalize ties with Israel. Now, this says that, of course, Trump is seeing eye to eye with Saudi Arabia normally without having any sort of deal with Israel. He doesn't want to deal with Israel between Saudi Arabia and Israel, of course. He doesn't have a problem in having a deal with them without this deal happening between them and Israel. Then Steve Witkoff, he is outright telling Israel, you will be paying a heavier price. All of these statements are important. Why? Because, well, if Donald Trump is taking this approach now, and he previously had so many statements that are so supportive of Israel, then clearly that was just a show. Now, if they're saying certain things that go against Israel or threaten Israel to a degree, that means we need to take that seriously. And if they're not clear, well, we need to try and understand what's behind it. So if Steve Witkoff is saying the price will be higher, what does he mean by the price will be higher and heavier on Israel? Does he mean that there will be a ceasefire deal in the future that will be more in the favor of the Palestinians? Or does he mean here that Israel's overall position in the future in the region as a country is going to be more problematic? Of course, his reference is to the actual deal. The price will be heavier, so you think it's to do with the deal too. But is the United States also signaling that they can shift from their endless support to Israel? Because clearly they're not considering Israel with the agreement with Iran. They're not considering Israel with the deal with Saudi Arabia. And they haven't considered Israel with the deal that they just had with Yemen. And that's very symbolic, because that US operation in the Red Sea was an operation that began to protect Israel. It began for the sake of Israel and ended for the sake of the US. Meaning they're not considering Israel with that too. So we're looking at a process here where hopefully, and this is what should have happened way before, the United States will ditch Israel for good. And when they ditch Israel for good, that's it. Israel is done, because there's no one to replace the United States for Israel. And this isn't the only interesting statement that we had from Witkoff himself. No, actually, there was another statement coming from Huckabee, a pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli, saying that the United States is not required to get permission from Israel to reach a deal with the Houthis. Now, this statement, the fact that Huckabee is making this statement, is showing you that the United States received a lot of criticism from Israel for reaching a deal with Ansarullah without consent, without the consent of the Israelis. They said United States Ambassador to Israel, Michael Huckabee, says that after speaking with US President Donald Trump and US Vice President J.D. Vance, he understands that Washington's actions against the Houthi attacks on Israel will depend on whether American citizens are harmed, according to Channel 12 News. So, if no American soldiers are harmed or American citizens are harmed, we don't have a problem, basically. This is what they're saying to the Israelis. The United States isn't required to get permission from Israel to make some type of arrangement that would get the Houthis from firing on our ships. Huckabee says in a clip from an interview to an Israeli network. That's before they published it. His comments follow Trump's surprise announcement this week of a bilateral ceasefire agreement between the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen and the US after the rebel group vowed to continue its attacks on Israel. So there is a pattern. There is an undeniable and clear pattern where the United States senior figures, the most senior figures in the United States and the United States administration, are shifting, or at least taking sides and making positions that are not really good to Israel. Donald Trump outright refusing to speak with Netanyahu, Hexeth canceling, they're having deals that do not include Israel, Huckabee having this criticism like, we don't need your approval, Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, trying to clear the air and, fix the problem. But nothing is working so far. Now, what can fix all of this? Well, there's one thing that Benjamin Netanyahu can do that can potentially fix this problem and take things back to the right way between Israel and the United States. And that is agreeing to a ceasefire deal upon the arrival of Donald Trump to the region. How likely is Benjamin Netanyahu to do that? No, very likely. I'll tell you why. Benjamin Netanyahu is not likely to agree to a deal when Trump arrives, because he hasn't agreed to one already. Benjamin Netanyahu was most likely warned that he's not going to see you if you're not going to get a deal. Yet he's pretending like everything is fine between him and Donald Trump. And some people who, in his government are still, talking about the good old days when Trump was threatening with all hell, saying that we need to implement this plan. And they're not reading between the lines. They're not really getting the messages and hints that they're receiving from the United States administration. He's unlikely to accept a deal unless he significantly reduces from the Israeli demands, which are the complete dismantling of the arms of Hamas in Gaza and getting rid of the Palestinian resistance altogether. These are things that are not going to happen. From the perspective of the Palestinians, they're willing to reach certain agreements. Hamas said, we're willing to not run Gaza politically. We're willing to have a different administration, a technocratic government that will be from the Palestinians and agreed upon from the Palestinians. However, there's no talk about the resistance or the arms of the resistance, because the arms are non-negotiable and they're tied with the existence of the occupation. And we exercise our legitimate right to fight an illegal occupation on our lands. That's why we have arms. But Netanyahu added that as a condition to reach a deal. Before, Israel used to say these things, but in recent months, Benjamin Netanyahu and his delegation, they actually started to request it as a clause to be added in the agreement, to a level where this was passed to the Palestinian resistance, to the delegation led by Hamas primarily, to which they responded with an outright rejection. They said, no way, it's not going to happen. So Netanyahu would have to climb down really seriously. He would need to climb down the tree, or various trees that he climbed on, one by one, in a very clear way, so that there can be a deal. Otherwise, he is risking deteriorating relations with the United States, and for Israel to be left alone as a pariah state, eating itself up until it dismantles itself.